Good morning. Welcome to the show, Fundamentals with Matt Burk. I am your host, Matt Burk. Today I have a guest of ours running a fund, Brandon Rooks. Brandon, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you inviting me.
Of course, of course. So looking forward to chatting with you. So Brandon, I was reading up on your website a little bit here, but why don't you give a little background for the folks listening in today about yourself, kind of how you got into the real estate business. I understand you're in the military for a while before that, and give us a little bit about Brandon Rooks, and then we'll dive into more about the fund here in a moment.
Well, came out of the military in 92, so that's a lot of years in between there. But I served 6 years, 3 tours in the Persian Gulf. I'm a combat Desert Storm Navy veteran, and I ran the anti-ship missile defense system on a guided missile destroyer with the top secret clearance, and we saw a few skirmishes. I thought electronic warfare was, amazing, and I was going to do electronics when I got out of the Navy. But once I got out of the Navy, I didn't ever want to look at electronics again. So I went into sales and fell in love with sales, and just through a long history of working at a few different companies and being a top sales rep in those companies, I got headhunted. Eventually got headhunted into the mortgage industry, and almost immediately started doing investment mortgages for a bunch of buyers out of California that were buying properties all over the U.S. in new construction turnkey rentals.
So you're like brokering loans, so originating and brokering real estate loans?
I did, yeah. And at any given time, I had about 100 loans a month in my pipeline, closing about 70 of them. And I worked with Ohio National Savings Bank. And I gave everybody a 1.5% broker origination, but I gave everybody a bank rate, par rate. I didn't make money on the back like most mortgage guys did. So I was beating everyone in the country by about a 1% on their rate. And that led to getting involved in more investment real estate, being headhunted into selling investment real estate. And everything was going great right up until 2008, which we've all been there.
I remember those days very, very vividly.
Yeah. Learned a lot of lessons from that. Actually, at the time when it all came crumbling, I had about $88 million of properties under contract with a hedge fund out of California in Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, which is resort retirement second home destination, central Missouri. And everything just shut down. I mean, $5 billion in construction, ongoing construction and development shut down. I lost everything, but none of my investors did. I had investors that had paid deposits on some properties. And I basically just told them, look, I don't care if it takes a year to 5 years. I'll get you your deposit back through us doing other deals. And it took a little while, but eventually I did, and made sure that every one of my investors got every one of their deposits back. And for that, they just continued to follow me and worked with me from there on out. So one thing I talk about is I haven't made a cold call since 1999. All of my existing clients and investors have been with me for years, or their referrals from clients have been with me for years. And then there's a handful of groups that I'm a speaker, sponsor, advisor to, and get new members there.
Yeah, and a lot of times, coming out of like things like the Great Recession, right? I mean, that was a tough period, obviously, for a lot of people. We had our own challenges. I've shared my story a lot, but it forces you to kind of take a deep look at what you're doing, right? And have to really adjust and say, okay, what am I going to do going forward? So coming out of the Great Recession, you've done a lot of stuff in the real estate business. What did you do at that point? And kind of how did you get into the point of starting and running a fund?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I dove back in. We started doing free real estate seminars, and we were helping investors just buy pieces of ground, lots in certain developments where they could be picked up for a song, legacy lots, power and water and sewer and all that stuff was in. It was just a blank lot ready to be built. And we said, put your money here. When the market comes back, these lots will go up in value. And that was like 2010. I got back into it. And then by about 2012, started connecting with the builders and the renovators that I'd known across the country. And then I started putting together, with a couple other people that I'd been working with, turnkey rental properties. And by 2015, we were really, crushing it. I sold 954 turnkey rental properties across the country in 2015.
As a broker?
Well, actually, as an agent, and under we held our license as a brokerage, but we worked as an investment consulting firm.
Yep.
And which, the average house was 125 to 150,000 in 2015, but they were all cash flowing good. But I started to see the cash flow and cap rates start getting depressed. The rates were, the prices were going up, the rents weren't. So I kind of morphed over and I'm like, this could be another one of those things where we're riding a wave. And I started working specifically with some new construction groups and raising capital to help them build the properties. And that's where we were able to start getting a better interest rate for my clients. And it kind of morphed over into that.
So you were helping them raise what the debt capital for that?
Debt capital for the lots for their build for rent. So which is kind of unique. You'll hear on my website or you hear me say, we're in and out at dirt. So when I raise capital with my investors, and what the Rockstar Capital Fund does is we put that money to work in lots or land. So we're in and out at dirt, no horizontal infrastructure, no vertical construction. And for that, we pay our clients an average double-digit ROI. One of my mantras is to make sure I'm always making my clients at least 15% annual interest on their money. So, and we kind of morphed and fell into actually doing land entitlement, where we have a team that goes out, finds ground, sources it, researches it, does due diligence on it, and then they go and preview it with the national builders in the Southeast that we've got a really strong connection to. And once we have verbals, then we'll put that ground under contract, and then the team starts working on getting it fully entitled. And this is what we call a paper lot business. So all they're doing is taking raw ground, getting it to fully entitled, shovel ready, and permitted. No pipes, no sewer, no streets, nothing.
But are you acquiring the land itself, and then your investors are coming into the deal as the owner of the property, or you're raising capital to lend money to the person who is buying the land and doing the entitlement?
You invest in the fund, and then we keep the money working with three entities, and that's BRD Land and Investment. That's the land entitlement side. And then Buller River and Estero Developments. That's the build for rent side. And when we lend, a lot of times it's under a controlling situation. And this is where it gets a little bit unique and outside of normal lending parameters. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of ground that we hold note and mortgage to, and we hold a note and mortgage within the funds that exceeds the money that's borrowed, the values are way up. But a lot of times I will lend on an assignment of a contract. So they'll put the ground under contract. The seller cannot sell it out from under them. They have a 12-month process to work on getting it fully entitled and permitted. And if there's at any point in time that ground cannot be permitted, or something comes up it's going to take, 4 or 5 years instead of 9 to 18 months to get it ready, then they can back out of the contract and they don't end up getting stuck with ground that they cannot sell, which is a very unique scenario. So we control it. And then a lot of times when we get to the end of the 12 months, if we don't already have it done and sold off to a national builder, we'll close on it. Then we actually hold the ground, and typically it's 3 to 6 months and it's being sold.
So I sort of follow that, and I think if we could go really deep on all that to get a better handle on it. But I'd like to. The show that I've tried to create here, Brandon, is around the fund themselves. So maybe let's pivot a little bit and chat with you about. So you've set up a fund vehicle, is that right? So investors, when they invest with you, they're investing into a fund, and I understand the fund. And maybe is this not your first fund, right? You've had multiple funds.
Right. So it started out as I did a Reg D 506B under, instruction from my attorney explaining what we did. He goes, well, this is what you want. Yeah. And we set it to 7.5 million, and we set it at, 10,000 minimum. quickly raised capital in 2019. We hit 7.5 and then realized we actually needed probably more like 10. And we did a letter to all the investors and said, hey, we'd like to go to a 10% or a 10 million. And everybody's like, yeah, go for it. And then it was capped out. And then the companies kept growing and getting bigger. And they're like, there's like, hey, man, we can grow this into more markets. And I said, okay, well, let's go with the 506C.
So you launched a second fund, and this is also a Reg D?
Reg D, 506C, so 50,000 minimum accredited investors only.
Yep.
And the idea was that, okay, if we're going to grow like this, we're going to have to go after a little bit bigger investment. So I've got a lot of clients that I love all my clients that have been with me for years. And I don't care if you invest 10,000, 100 or $1 million, everybody gets the same treatment. But we went with a bigger fund, and it was funny because, we paid 12% annual preferred in fund one because there's that much money in dirt. There's a lot of profit in it. And when I started talking to people in the industry that I know and trust, like that runs Family Office Club or runs syndications and has raised millions, they're like, I said, well, I'm going to do another 12% preferred and 50% profit share. I'm like, oh, no, you don't want to do that. If someone sees 12% preferred, they'll just be like, oh, that sounds too good to be true. And they won't even look at your offer. So I toned it down. I took it down to 8% and still did the 55% profit share. And I reduced management fees. I like to make my money because we make money. Sure. So I don't try to make it on the investors and a bunch of fees. I mean, it's very simple. So that worked. We continued to grow.
How did that one do? How much did you raise in fund two?
In about 2 years, we raised 20 million. So kind of kept pace with the other one. It kind of hit a cap. I hit a cap or a wall where, I was reaching the end of my database, and we started getting a lot more referrals that, they're like, hey, our kids would love to invest, our parents, but they're not accredited. So I opened up another 506B Reg D fund, and it was amazing. The first fund, $10 million, we had 12 non-accredited investors. But by fund three, before it even hit 3.5 million, I had 35 non-accredited investors.
So which is the limit, right? That's the cap.
It's the cap. Yeah.
506 in a Reg D. What did you do while you were doing fund two? What did you do with fund one? Was it still?
It was still operating.
Were you reinvesting? So like as loans would pay off, you would make new loans with that money.
Correct.
Keep that going. Correct. So you're operating fund one and now you're operating fund two at the same time, and then you got
and then fund three.
So one and two are both still going at the same time, and then you launch fund three.
Correct. And then still had more non-accredited investors coming to the table. And keep in mind, every non-accredited investor that we have come in, we know it is a referral. It is a family member. It is some of our doctors and dentists are like, we want to do our kids' Roths, in this. And I had to open fund four. So I went back to my attorney and I'm like, dude, I says, this is getting complicated. I've got all these spreadsheets and all these profiles and programs. And I'm like, this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. He goes, what you really need, Rockstar. Everybody calls me Rockstar, by the way. So if it seems weird, just understand that's what everybody calls me. He says, you need a Reg A tier 2 fund. And I'm like, well, what's that? He says, a little bit more compliance. He says, but you can raise up to 75 million a year. You can have as many non-accredited investors as you want. He goes, and actually, he says, you don't even have to have a prior relationship with them, and you can just market, you got to make sure that we're watching what you put out there. And he goes, but this will allow you to continue to grow because the three companies that I'm lending to, their growth has been phenomenal. And, I've been in the investment real estate game for over 23 years, and I sleep really good at night because, we're never going to stop building in America. If we do, we've got a problem. But now the companies that I'm lending to, they are selling to 12 of the top 25 builders in the country. And what they've kind of amassed, just kind of give you a little bit of a taste of where we're at. We've got a total of about 40 million raised right now at work with them, but they have $640 million of ground in their pipeline, and their profit margins are 40 to 60%. So they're doing well. And right now, some of the biggest builders in the country are putting their stuff under contract left and right.
No, it's interesting to see what's happening with builders right now in today's, and that's a whole nother topic of conversation. What did you do with? Did you roll 1, 2, and 3 into 4, or you still have those funds in existence while you're launching?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So what we're doing is our Reg A is launched, qualified, and by the way, if anybody's ever thinking of doing this, you cannot call a Reg A fund. You have to call it an offering.
Yeah.
Powers that be don't like. You can call Reg D's funds, but you can't call a Reg A that. So it's an offering.
Okay.
We launched it. I've registered in all 50 states. Believe it or not, Texas has been the most difficult. It's a issuer issued fund. So I'm not going about a broker dealer type fund.
Yep.
Because to be honest with you, what we do, well, I think it's pretty easy to explain. When I explain it, investors just get confused. Especially
Reg A's have a lot of nuances to them. They're relatively new still, right? I've seen some people be successful with them. I've seen a lot of people struggle with them. What do you like? How long have you had the Reg A going?
So just got, what month are we in, Matt?
What is it? June 3.
We had it qualified. Also, they don't get approved; they get qualified right at the end of April. It took us about 9 months to get that done. Yeah. One thing I like about it is that there is better compliance. I have to do third-party CPA audits every year, which I'm fine with. And right now we're doing what's called a transfer. So we went to a transfer agent. They are looking at all the investors that are in all the previous 4 Reg D funds, validating their investment, what we're lent on, all the notes. And then they do a transfer of all of them into the Reg A. We're in that process right now. We should have that completed.
So you are going to convert the other funds into this offering, to use correct terminology. And does that require the consent of the investors in the old funds to transfer in versus getting cash back?
It does, and it's actually, what would my attorney call it? A negative rescission letter. So you put it out there, and if anybody does not want to do it, then they simply sign that letter and send it in.
And in which case, then you have to cash them out as opposed to move them, issue shares of the new offering, correct?
Correct. And I have a total of about 350 investors.
Yeah.
Nobody wants out.
Okay.
So all in one in.
Good.
Well, I consistently pay. Everybody's received every quarterly distribution since day one. There's been profit sharing events. And this new operation, because I'm streamlining everything, allows me to shrink management fees and fund operating expenses, which I'm always looking at how I improve it for my investors. I want them to always be winning. And so the way I'm streamlining it, they're like, man, you just keep doing what you're doing, Rockstar, because we've had a lot of things that haven't gone well over the past few years, but you're always consistent and you always pay. And we're like a bank. We just keep the principal turning. It's no one gets locked up on a specific deal. You invest, you get paid interest. We keep the principal working over and over and over again. And with the growth that's going on with those companies, there's some really exciting news going on, but we'll get back to that in a second.
So what have you liked about the Reg A versus the Reg D? I know a lot of listeners and clients that we've had over the years ask questions around, okay, what's the difference between a Reg D and a Reg A? Why would you choose one over the other? What has been your experience so far? And maybe tell us what you like about it and what's more difficult about
it. Difficulty is, it's going to cost you a little bit more to get it set up. And that's just because of the process, right? if you go broker dealer Reg A, it's going to be even a more intense
expensive.
process. More expensive and more intense. Yeah, you have to get a broker dealer of record, and that's going to cost you right off the bat. They're going to get a chunk of that. And then you still go after a broker dealer, and broker dealers, no offense if anybody's listening, you are one, you're expensive. Cost of capital is high. And I went issue because with us, it's a family business, and I want to get to know everyone. And I have a team, and I have a few principals. They were general partners before, and there was some different networks I'm not with. And that was how we expanded our base. But at the same time, we still want to be able to have a conversation with every single person. And the Reg A just allows me to not worry about, am I meeting a cap? Are we about to get to the end of our raise? And then I've got the same situation. We're still growing. And now I got to go start another fund. I don't mind the compliance. I don't mind, having to send all the numbers up to a third-party CPA. We are what I would like to call right now. We've been growing this for 4 years, and now we're at a stabilization point where it's about to explode on the other end, and the business is going to 10x. So this hopefully will allow me at needing to raise $75 million a year. We're always seeding and funding that capital growth and expansion for these entities. But again, it's tied to dirt, and there's just not much you can do to screw up dirt, which is kind of nice,
So tell us about what are a little bit of the compliance things that you have to deal with. So you have to get an audit, right? You have to have a third party performing. What other compliance issues or requirements are there?
Just have all your ducks in a row. You're doing proper lending procedures. You've got proper paper trails. You've got notes and mortgages tied to assets which show value of what you lent on. Like I said, I'll lend on an assignment of contract, but that's documented, and that's in our offering. But we also close on a lot of ground, and we're the mortgage holder. And we were pretty fortunate that we lent a few years ago and started buying up lots in Southwest, like in Florida and Charlotte and areas that are still doing very well, all things considered. So the value of those is gone well up over what we have. If we had to liquidate everything right now, it could be fire sale, and every investor would get every dollar of principal back and all the interest that they've had coming to them. So, and that's how I like to keep it. And that's part of your compliance too. Like, you got to send up your balance sheets. You got to send up your pro formas, your P&Ls, and just you're making sure that you're being a good steward of your investors' funds and money.
Yeah. And I like all of those things, documenting it, having a mortgage and a trust deed and so forth, all that's required even in a Reg D fund, right? Is there something specific to a Reg A fund on the compliance side that you could share with people that you have to do that you don't have to do in a Reg D fund?
I guess I don't know yet because the offering just got launched.
Yeah, you're just getting going.
Yeah, we haven't got to the point where we do have to start doing that. But the attorney that we work with, he also went through kind of the same procedures, and he set up a Reg A, and he's had that for several years. So I think that's important. I try to say I'm kind of a blue jeans kind of investor. I've been fortunate, I've got a good IQ, and obviously had a top secret clearance and got into a good field. But when it comes down to having that analytical bean counter mind, that's not me.
Well, that's generally like most real estate folks I've ever met. That's not necessarily the cloth that they're cut out. So we get that.
But what you got to have is a great accountant. And you've got to have a great attorney, and don't try to cut corners, and these are people that have come highly recommended that are in my network. And that's really important. All of the investors are coming from our network. It's not like I'm just working with someone blue sky. Yeah. Everybody that I work with has got a reputation, and that's important to me because obviously if I haven't made a cold call in well over 20 some years. And I treat my investors like my friends, and making sure that I always perform for them goes far and above the money that I'll ever make.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, Rockstar, we're getting close to the end of the time together. So, why don't you tell us a little bit? I ask everybody, what's kind of your favorite or current podcast or audiobook or learning material that you're fired up about these days?
And I hate that you asked me that question. I saw it and I'm like, well, just be honest. I'm 55 years old and I still work 12 to 15-hour days behind my desk. I don't have time to get on a lot of podcasts, or my son does, which he now works for the company and he's out there. I do have a quote. It's one of my favorites. It's actually up here. It's like, if you think you can, you can. And if you think you can't, you're right. And that's Henry Ford. And I grew up poor. I mean, poor, and barely got through high school. Parents divorced, got moved all over the country. And I got out of high school, went right in the Navy. And I read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill while I was in the Navy. I know everybody's read that, right? Classic. And then I read Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
It's probably the last time I really read two books 30 some years ago, but it changed the trajectory of my life. You set your mind to, you can accomplish whatever you set your mind to. There's a lot of great information out there, but don't get too ingrained in trying to read it all, watch it all. Find a couple key things that work for you and then take action. I think taking action stands out far and above, just constantly reading. At some point in time, you got to make it happen, right?
No, I couldn't agree more. So, Rockstar, thanks for being on the show. We really appreciate it. It's fascinating to hear about funds and Reg Ds or Reg As too, and a lot of stuff we could dive in deeper, but we're out of time. So thank you for being here. I appreciate you being on the show.
You bet. Appreciate you, Matt. You guys have a great day.
Yep. Thanks so much. You too. Everybody, thank you very much for joining us. Join us next week, episode 18. Look forward to having you here. Thanks so much for being here. In the meantime, stay sharp.